Okay, moving on to the next concept. We're moving on to we're going to start talking about minor pieces. It's just going to be a brief summary. So knights, in summary, are one of the minor pieces that we want to consider. There are the bishops as well, but we'll start with the knights. Okay, so the key concepts are: knights are strongest in their closed positions, in closed positions, and they're the best for preventing or blocking pawns from advancing, given how they can move around pawn structures, as opposed to a bishop where if an entire pawn chain is present, it can't move past it. Knights are stuck on the first or second ranks, or knights stuck on the first or second ranks are playing a defensive role and are inferior to a bishop that's on open squares, so you really need to consider that carefully. Okay, knights on the third rank can be used for defense or attack at a moment's notice, and then knights on the fourth rank are the same as knights on the third rank, and then knights on the fifth and sixth ranks are very strong. Then we have bishops. So bishops are, so the main ideas behind bishops are that when you're making pawn moves, when you're moving your pawns at the beginning of the game, you want to make sure that you consider how it'll affect the activity of your bishops. I think a lot of people do this inherently when they're pushing up pawns at the opening, but just something to keep in mind if possible. And then you want to recognize what kind of bishop you're working with in the opening game. So it's important to figure out what kind of bishop you're working with, and you're trying to convert it is also important, meaning converting it from being an inactive or useless bishop to an active bishop. So there are three types of bishops. Bishops that are so active bishops are bishops that are attacking on open diagonals, meaning that they cover a lot of squares or ground. And then useful bishops are usually the bishops that are typically defending only some pieces or attacking others with no depth in coverage. And then useless bishops, they are not on open diagonals or currently incapable of attacking pieces due to being blocked off by its own pawns. And then, so there are some ways to manage a tall pawn or a useless bishop. It's getting your pawns off the same color as your bishop, which will unblock it and make it more active. I mean, duh. And then prioritize getting your bishop outside the pawn chain before you form the pawn chain. Like in the opening, I can just show, maybe I won't show an example. I'll let you know later. And then exchanging your useless bishop for either your opponent's bishop or knight if it's more developed. So if you're dealing with a useless bishop and an exchange is possible, go for the exchange. And then opposite colored bishops, in terms of an endgame, opposite colored bishops, this usually indicates a draw. However, there are scenarios where this isn't the case, and you need to be able to identify how to take the advantage of the case where the bishops aren't on the same colors. Knights versus bishops, and there will absolutely be such a scenario, and you need to be aware of the imbalances when presented with such a scenario. And again, this is why it's really important to study the position that you're dealing with when you're comparing knights. You're a knight versus bishop scenario where your opponent has a knight and you have the bishop, or you have the knight and your opponent has the bishop. Closed versus open positions, that's the idea. Okay? And then you want to play with the bishop pair. Just when you're playing with a bishop pair, meaning you have two bishops, you keep open diagonals, and remember that your bishop pair covers the entire board. So place it on squares that you anticipate your opponent could move towards. Okay?